Reeve, and I call Dr. David Reeve.
Take a seat. Dr. Reeve, before you give any evidence in this matter, do you promise to tell the truth to the court?
I do.
Thank you.
Doctor, could I ask you to state your full name for the record, please?
David Mark Reeve.
And you've provided two documents to the Coronial Inquest, is that right?
Yes.
And the first document is a statutory declaration of the 22nd of November 2019, correct?
Yes.
So the record you're on, that's document 9-9. And the second document you provided was an affidavit dated the 28th of September 2022, correct?
Yes.
And that's an affidavit of some 100 pages when you take into account the annexures.
Yes.
All right. And that's document 9-9A. I might just quickly clarify with you the relationship between those two documents. In your affidavit, so the second document, you say that you provided the statutory declaration for the criminal investigation.
I believe so, yes.
And you understood that you were providing the affidavit for the Coronial investigation?
Yes.
And do I take that to mean that that's the reason you provided much more information in the affidavit?
Yes.
Information about systems, processes and the like?
Yes.
What's your current role within the Department of Health?
I'm the General Manager for Primary and Public Health Care for the Central Australia region with NT Health.
Okay. And how long have you been doing that?
I've been in that position since May 2018.
And what's your background? Do you have a background in public health or do you have a clinical background?
First 20 years of my career I was a medical laboratory scientist. I then did a doctorate in public health and gone to public health and primary health care.
And when did you get into public health?
In about 2009, I had a job as a chronic disease coordinator in Fitzroy Crossing in Kimberley, and then following that gone to management, primary healthcare management for the Kimberley Population Health Unit.
And is it fair to say that the majority of your career since then has been has not just been in public health, but in public health in contexts where Indigenous health is a big part of your work?
Correct.
Places like Fitzroy Crossing in WA.
Yes.
And then the central region of
Yes.
the Northern Territory. What is primary health care?
So primary health care is that first line of care. So if you think about your GP services, so when you go for things like chronic disease, immunisations, childcare, antenatal care, men's health, women's health, so that first line, then you get referred, after that you can go to the second line where you may get referred to specialists or the like. And then you've got public health care, which is kind of the broader population health issues around immunisations, sexual health. We do some specialised work in Central Australia, like with trachoma, rheumatic heart disease, so on a broader population level.
So it's fair to say that primary health care on a day-to-day basis is the type of health care that most people engage with.
Yes.
And although primary health practitioners might not be treating the most acute or specialist conditions, primary health care is essential to managing health within a population, isn't it?
That's correct. And then they refer to the specialists who... Yes.
And deficits in primary health care can mean that conditions that aren't particularly serious end up presenting as chronic and acute conditions.
That's correct. So we have a front line to prevent the development of those chronic conditions.
Now, you describe your role in your statutory declaration as essentially being to ensure that Central Australia has government primary health care services provided.
Correct.
What does that involve in terms of your work?
Yes, so we cover, in the remote context outside Alice Springs, we have 23 government primary health care clinics. And we also, those on site, we have staff on site, not in all those because some of those are visiting services, but they are nurse-led clinics providing primary health care within those clinics, along with Aboriginal health practitioners, Aboriginal community workers, and we have admin roles. Our doctors tend to be in outreach services, so they go and visit those clinics and provide their services during the week, but live back in Alice Springs. We have what we call an outreach team, so we have midwives, child health nurses, dietitians, chronic disease educators, diabetes educators, men's health, health promotion teams that go out and work into these communities as well. Then we're a bit broader in that we also cover environmental health, so we have environmental health officers working with food safety, mosquito control, water issues. We cover in Alice Springs at Flynn Drive, we've got community health, so we're providing immunisations there, working with families, lactation consultants. We provide all the government dental services, both in town and in the remote clinics. We provide the service at the prison, so we have a prison health team out there. We have community allied health, which consists of speech pathologists, OTs and physios, working both in town, out and remote. And then we have public health, which are doing things like when we had COVID-19 and the issues I mentioned before.
In terms of the provision of primary health care in the remote setting, one of the important parts of your role, I take it, is just to ensure that they are staffed, correct?
Correct, yes, I know.
And that take into account safety considerations, they can remain staffed.
Correct.
Now, you've given some evidence about how essential primary health care is to the population generally, but would you agree that in remote Indigenous communities it is particularly important?
Yes.
You've in fact given a list of publications you've authored at paragraph 21 of your affidavit.
Yes.
I don't need you to turn to it, but one of those, you published it, co-authored it in 2015. It was titled Strengthening Primary Healthcare, Achieving Health Gains in a Remote Region of Australia.
Yes.
Know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
And there you wrote, in rural and especially remote areas, there is strong evidence that poor access to primary healthcare remains a critical barrier, particularly for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and this is reflected in the high rate of avoidable hospitalisations.
Yes.
You still agree with that?
Yes.
What does this poor access to primary health care look like in a remote Indigenous community in the central area of the territory?
Yes, I guess if we can think of access compared to remote communities, obviously in an urban setting you've got access to GPs and other providers, allied health providers, so whole multidisciplinary teams. In remote, we've only got very small teams consisting of our primary healthcare nurses, like I mentioned before, and so the other access to services by visiting teams, which are only there either for a few days, which may only visit once a month or once every 3 months. So access to primary healthcare services is very limited in the remote context because of the travel required.
In addition to the difficulties that arise because of access or difficulties with access, you're also dealing with a population generally that has more acute or chronic health issues. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, Central Australia has one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world. So,
and other chronic health conditions that present disproportionately Indigenous communities are conditions like respiratory illness.
Yes.
And chronic cardiac conditions.
Yes.
Now, in that quote that I read to you, it says that the evidence of poor access to primary health care is reflected in the high rate of avoidable hospitalisations.
Yes.
What's an avoidable hospitalisation?
Avoidable hospitalisation, if somebody is admitted to hospital, but it's thought that if something had occurred previously that would have prevented hospitalisation. So I think if we consider some diseases that you can prevent by vaccination, then if that person had been vaccinated, they might not have entered hospital. So it's things along those lines.
Is it fair to say that in addition to avoidable hospitalisations, limited access to primary health care can increase preventable death in remote locations?
That's correct, yes.
Now, everything that we've been talking about quite generally about primary health care and access to primary health care in remote communities in the central region would apply to Yuendamu. Is that correct?
Correct.
Ultimately, in your article, you wrote that primary health care was critical to reduce, and I quote, unfair and remediable health inequities for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and in that way to close the gap.
Yes.
Would you agree that what you're saying, that access to primary health care is not just about health comes, it is about reducing unfairness and inequity in the health system?
Yes.
And that in the Australian context, and in particular in the Northern Territory, that unfairness or inequity, if left unaddressed, tends to be experienced by Aboriginal people.
Yes.
So access to primary health care is about ensuring that the health system is not discriminatory.
Yes.
Obviously, working for the Department of Health, you employ health staff
Yes.
as employees and contractors.
Mainly employees, few contractors, yes.
Certainly it's a part of your role and the role of the Department of Health as a department to ensure the safety of its employees.
Yes.
And so an important part of delivering health services in a remote setting is managing safety concerns in the remote settings.
Yes.
Now, staff safety has been a particular focus for the Department of Health since the Remote Area Nurse Safety Review in 2016.
Yes.
And that review was prompted by the death of a remote area nurse in the AP Wirelands in South Australia, I think.
Yes.
The review found, are you familiar with the review?
Yes.
It found that remote work was not inherently dangerous, but that there were risk factors that needed to be identified and managed. Would you agree?
Yes.
And it made recommendations for managing that risk.
Yes.
Now, paragraph 93 of your affidavit, you can go to it if you like, but you don't need to. You set out some of the recommendations from the RAN Safety Review.
Yes.
Now, the first recommendation at sub A was a direct result of the circumstances of the death in the AP Wirelands, and that's a requirement that remote health professionals attend in pairs after hours.
Yes.
But the second recommendation is that the Health Department establish mechanisms for collaborations and partnerships with remote community groups, such as the local community council, schools and non-government agencies, to share information and address local issues, including staff safety.
Yes.
So what the review recommended was not just that you collaborate with the community in order to deliver health services,
Yes.
but that collaboration was a way of managing risk to health staff.
Yes.
In your view, what do those collaborations and partnerships, or how do they assist you to manage risk?
So I guess if you're looking at the stakeholders in the community, it's everybody within the community. I guess I'm talking about collaboration and meetings within the community. It's people talking together, and I guess within the staff safety context, being able to discuss what's happening, what issues are going on, and then I guess talking together, coming up solutions might be able to address them. So that's both providers of services as well as local community members.
And so I take it that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous people.
Yes.
Do you see value in the participation of Indigenous community members above and beyond the participation of the non-Indigenous stakeholders?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And what is that value?
Well, they know their community, they know what's going on with the community, they've got ideas and solutions to any issues that stakeholders might arise, so they're a key part of actually providing any solutions and to any problems that are there.
Similarly, I'll skip over sub C and sub D, but at sub E you note that it was recommended that a measure that the Department of Health could and should adopt to manage risk was that of increasing Indigenous participation in the workforce. You see that?
Yes.
And how does that assist to manage risk?
So I guess if we have, like in our own context, we have Aboriginal people working in our house centres. Again, they're an excellent liaison with the community, telling us what's going on with the community, helping to provide some translation so we can work together, and especially in a health context, improve health overall. So work with a clinician on the ground. We also, I guess, in the context of Aboriginal health practitioners, also provide clinical services, so they're providing culturally safe care. So absolutely, it all goes towards both clinical safety and safety in general.
Okay. In terms of the type of safety risk that presented in this case, which didn't really arise in the clinical setting at all,
Yes.
can you see a role for, or can you see how Indigenous participation in the workforce, increased Indigenous participation, might assist to manage risk in the long term?
Yeah, sorry, could you just
So
decide that was...
outside the clinical context,
Yes.
do you think that increasing Indigenous participation in the workforce
Yes.
might assist you to manage safety risks to
Yes.
staff?
Yes.
And how might that assist you?
Again, local staff have context of what's occurring in the community. They provide extra information. Again, also a liaison between themselves, and if we have traditional owners, to be able to go to leaders in the community to talk about things, bring the two parties together to have a discussion. So
if, for example, there was unrest in the community, fighting between two family groups that was threatening staff safety, you might go to one of your local Indigenous employees and say, look, what's the context here?
yes.
Who's fighting?
Yes.
How long are they going to fight for?
Yeah, well, yes. To inquire what's going on, that's correct. Yes, yes. We would hope they wouldn't be fighting very long. Yeah.
But that information would be critical to
Yes.
making an objective assessment of risk.
Yes.
Obviously, and this isn't something that you deal with in your affidavit, there are other long-term measures that you can adopt to manage security and safety.
Yes.
One of them is physical security infrastructure, would you agree?
Yes.
Security screens,
Yes.
fencing,
Yes.
alarms, and so on.
Yes.
And would you agree that the greater the investment in those types of security infrastructure, the less likely it is that you'll end up in a position where you need to make a critical decision about the safety of your staff?
Yes.
Okay. One tool that you do have in your toolkit to manage staff safety is the temporary withdrawal of staff. Is that right?
Yes.
Would it be correct to say that in a sense it's a tool of last resort?
Yes.
You want to know that you've exhausted other options before you pull staff out of a community?
Yes.
And you want to know that you're taking steps in the long term to ensure that you don't need to withdraw staff from a community.
Yes.
Now, is it a reflection of how significant it is to withdraw staff that the authority to do so lies at the executive and general manager level?
Yes.
Okay. What is the nature of that delegation? Is it under a statute or from the minister?
Yes. No, I don't believe there's any document like that that details that delegation. No.
Is there any document that sets out who can make this decision?
Only our document that we've got with our temporary guideline. Yes. Though that's, I guess, on an NT government level. There is a remote worker safety policy that's now NT wide, which now details that we go to, when these decisions need to be made, we go to the regional directors. So there'll be regional executive directors for health in Central Australia and the regional executive director for Chief Minister and Cabinet. So yes, so we have got that document to say to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you said that it was set out in the guidelines who was to make the decision.
Yes.
Certainly at page 1 of the guideline, this is the guideline that applied as at November 2019, it said that the decision will be made by PHC management.
Right.
are you aware of whether this document specifies who within PHC management is to make the decision?
I thought that it did say general manager, but maybe it did not. Certainly, understanding was that such decisions would be going to the what I would call my primary healthcare executive management. Yes.
Why
Which
is it?
annexure are you referring to?
This is Annexure 5, Your Honour, to the affidavit.
Why is it such a serious matter to temporarily withdraw all staff from a remote community?
We're there to provide, obviously, primary healthcare services and emergency services. So, withdrawing staff from an immediate site, that is not a decision you ever want to take lightly, because we want to continue maintaining our services on site.
But there is a difference, isn't there, between, for example, shutting down a clinic in the centre of Alice Springs and
Shutting down a clinic somewhere like Yundamu, isn't there?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
precisely because it's so far away.
Yes.
Shutting down a single clinic in a remote community like Yundamu means that there is no access to primary health care, at least in the immediate term, in the community.
So we have a number of communities where we have no staff on site, so we provide primary health care through a visiting service. So we do have a number of communities where the staff visit once or twice a week to provide primary health care, and 24/7 provide emergency care to that community. So no community is without services.
Certainly in a community like Yundamu that is serviced by a permanent health clinic, there would be an expectation within the community, that they could access the clinic within business hours, wouldn't there?
Yes.
And people would make arrangements with the clinic to do things like collect medication.
Yes.
People might make risk assessments about their own health on the basis that the clinic is there to be consulted should things take a turn for the worse.
Yes.
And as you've said, there is a lot of chronic and acute ill health in remote communities like Yundamu.
Yes.
And many of these older people with respiratory and cardiac illnesses can take a turn for the worse pretty quickly
Yes.
and can immediately require intervention from health staff.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that that's why it doesn't occur that often in the Northern Territory, the temporary withdrawal of health staff?
It only occurs in that context with staff safety, due to staff safety. So the only reason staff would be withdrawn is for extreme staff safety risks or perceived risk. So we don't withdraw staff in any other situation. So, yeah.
Paragraph 87 of your affidavit, I'll ask you to turn to it. You give evidence about withdrawals that have taken place in Central Australia and vital regions in recent years due to concerns for staff safety.
Yes.
Can I just ask you a question about the first four words of that paragraph? You say by way of illustration. Are those four examples just examples, or are they the only four withdrawals, temporary withdrawals from remote communities that have occurred since about August 2018?
Those are the ones that since I've been in the position. So I believe there was some before I started in the position of general manager. But
and you started in about May of 2018?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're saying that that's not an illustrative list, that is an exhaustive list of the withdrawals since you commenced in the role, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can I ask you a specific question about the first example?
Yes.
This was an occasion on which health centre staff were withdrawn from Ali Coronial. And apologise. Yes, withdrawn from Ali Kurung in response to community fighting, which involved axes and machetes and the police ceasing their services after being attacked. Were you aware that the police did not, in fact, cease to provide services in Ali Kurung at that time?
I understood at that time that there was a lot of fighting and police withdrew when I say withdraw, I'm not completely if that meant withdrew from the whole community or stayed with community, but withdrew from engaging with what was going on at the moment, is my understanding. But I don't believe it was for the whole 4 days. It was only for maybe overnight.
If I put it to you that what actually occurred was that the police withdrew from a single incident but remained in the community, could that be correct?
I believe that could be correct, yes.
It's not a matter of much significance, I just wanted to...
Yes.
Now, each of these 4 examples involve violence or community unrest, is that right?
Yes.
And given that this is a complete list of the temporary withdrawal of health services in Central Australia, where the concern is staff safety,
Yes.
is it fair to say that before the 9th of November 2019, no clinic had ever been withdrawn due to property offending?
Correct.
And in fact, it's never happened since.
No. I think in...
I'll ask you about
Sorry.
withdrawing individual health staff in a moment.
Right, sorry.
But in terms of withdrawing the entire clinic,
Yes.
that hadn't happened before and it hasn't happened after.
Depends if you consider one person being withdrawn being the entire clinic or not. So
were there circumstances in which a clinic was staffed by one?
yes, there was in March 2022. It depends, I guess. It depends on how you look at it. The nurse was on call overnight. It was the only nurse providing clinical services in that night, and had her house broken into and withdrawn that night. So, clinic.
With that exception,
Yes.
or perhaps if we certainly the 9th of November 2019 is the only occasion that you're aware of that clinic staffed by more than one person.
Yes.
Were you the decision maker or a decision maker in each of these cases?
Yes, I was involved in the decision at Ali Coronial. In one of the cases in the Mampa, I don't believe I was in the other one. I believe so at Willara, and in the Mampa again, yes.
Would there be some kind of documentation that records the conversations that led to these decisions?
There should be some notes or what we've put in our flash briefs about what occurred, yes.
And equally some kind of documentation that records risk assessment?
So it should be in our risk man system, so these all should be in our so we record what's going on in the our risk man system. Yeah.
I want to ask you some questions about making assessments of risk.
Can I ask you to turn to the guideline at page 1? This is at page 60 of your affidavit.
Yes.
Under the heading decision making, it reads, staff making the decision to leave a community due to serious concerns about their immediate safety is fully supported by PHC management.
Yes.
Can I ask you some questions about that? First, is it fair to say that you would not withdraw an entire health clinic unless there were serious concerns about immediate safety?
That's correct.
So less serious concerns might suffice to do something less significant?
Depends on the situation and what mitigation factors are in place. So again, it's a perception of staff, and I guess with the next paragraphs being not the decision maker, being the sole decision maker, then it's objective assessment of the risk, so it's a combination.
But certainly you would need a high degree of risk once you take into account any mitigation.
Yes.
Okay. The second question I had for you was precisely that. It's who makes the decision? In this paragraph, it says staff making the decision are supported.
Yep.
The next paragraph might suggest that they are not the sole decision makers or that they simply provide views to the decision makers. But who makes the decision to withdraw staff?
So it's consulting with staff about what's going on, the perceived risk. It's then assessing that risk of to staff and whether we can mitigate those factors or not. So, for instance, cooking like an example in December 2020 at community, there was lots of break-ins by children. Staff were over the break-ins. They weren't necessarily at risk physically, but they were just had enough of break-ins, and we were going to withdraw. So we were going to drive out, no matter what anybody said. So we did have a discussion with them to talk about what we could do to mitigate that, and that discussion around we talked with police to try and get extra police in, and also arrange for security guards to go there as well. That was the first time that we had actually considered that we could use security guards or could get security guards. And so since December 2020, security guards had prevented staff leaving communities because it provides that extra measure of safety, so mitigating against that risk.
I missed just at the very beginning the date.
So that was December, Christmas Day 2020.
And in which community?
That was in Yundamu.
Okay.
Did security guards remain, or are they just used when they're...
So on that particular time, so it was a Christmas Day, so I was working on a Christmas Day trying to organise all these things, and we'd never thought about security guards prior to that, and made inquiries and got hold of a security company. They couldn't provide a security guard straight away, so it still took 5 days to get a security guard. But we have had security guards out at Yundamu since that time because of ongoing issues.
For the clinic or the houses?
So they do the clinic and the houses, so they monitor, go around and monitor.
You're familiar with who Sally Halton is?
Yes.
And who's she?
She's the acting clinic manager at Yundamu.
And you'd be aware that she's provided a statutory declaration.
Yes.
In her statutory declaration, this is at page 56, Your Honour, she writes that things in Yundamu have improved since about November or December 2020. At that time, I was working as an outreach midwife for the Central Australian Health Service, based in Tennant Creek, and provided some relief assistance in Yundamu. My recollection is that there was 30 break-ins at houses of staff from the health centre and the school during the 26-day period I was in Yundamu. One evening, nearly every health centre staff car was smashed. Children used to regularly throw rocks at the health centre and vandalise cars with metal poles. Is that the period you're talking about?
Sorry, what date was she talking?
December of 2020.
Yes, I don't believe it was as much as what she describes, but it was during that period, yes.
Okay. When you say you don't think it was as much as she described, you don't think things were as bad on the ground?
Well, I guess if she was on the ground, but my recollection is certainly car windows being smashed and children breaking into homes, certainly, yes.
And that's an occasion on which you decided not to remove?
No, again, staff said they were going to drive out there and then. So it was like, doesn't matter what I say, we've had enough and we're just going to leave. So it was a discussion with staff about how we could then, what would make them safe and what we could do about making them safe. So,
were you actually involved in those discussions with the staff on the ground, or did someone below you within the department?
No, I was Christmas Day, I was at work having those discussions with staff.
Okay, so you were on the phone.
I was on the phone with my district manager. So we have a district manager who's responsible for regions. So I was on, but I guess Christmas Day was our on-call manager. So in those discussions, yes.
It took 5 days to get security guards. What did you arrange immediately that enabled the staff to feel that they could stay?
Yeah, so we also were talking police, and so police had agreed that they would also get extra staff. into Yuendamu. Unfortunately, we had a bit of a rainy season, and so the road to Yuendamu was not really passable, and the airstrip, they couldn't fly police into the airstrip as well. I believe, so we couldn't even get extra police there at the time, but I believe, and well, this is one of the things we came up with after the incident, was getting staff to be directly called to the police in Yuendamu. So there's like a mobile phone, so rather than going through the 1300 number and going that pathway, was directly contacting police on the ground and be able to talk to them.
So they can tell you both about the level of risk or level of offending within the community, correct?
The staff.
The police.
Yes. Well, yes. So I guess the staff are reporting to the police, so yes.
Perhaps I'll come at this way.
Sorry?
At page 9 of your affidavit, at paragraph 61, you then talk about the considerations that are relevant to your risk assessment. What do you consider when you make an assessment of the level of risk facing remote healthcare?
So again, it's that perceived risk. So staff have their own perceived level of risk. So they might feel they're being threatened by circumstance, or for instance, circumstances occurring, such if there was fighting outside in the community. So in my experience, although fighting does happen in the community, staff aren't targeted. No one's targeting the staff, but nevertheless, I guess it's very uncomfortable if you've got a large number of people with weapons fighting, and so they feel that might somehow be involved. And so even though they perceive that their risk is real, I might perceive that it's not as high as what they consider. But nevertheless, I can see that they could be involved, so we withdraw. So it's their perception of their risk and what they're telling me what's going on, and then what I consider an objective assessment of what is actually going on, and then weighing those options.
I suppose that's exactly what I was getting at with my question about the police. You need to make an objective assessment of the circumstances as they present in the community.
Yes.
And you're doing that in circumstances where there are heightened emotions amongst the staff who are providing you with information.
Yes, yes.
And so it's essential that you seek the views of local stakeholders about the level of risk in community, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, it's the police, isn't it, who are best placed to provide you with an objective assessment of the risk that the health centre faces at that time, correct?
Yes.
In fact, the second document that you annex to your affidavit is the Staff Safety Risk Assessment Primary Healthcare Remote Procedure. You see that?
Yes.
Now, this document guides decision making within the clinical context, correct?
Yes, it's about call-outs and risk assessments as far as call-outs.
But can I ask you to turn to page 2? There's a heading, Initial Risk Assessment, and then a long paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
About halfway through that paragraph, it says, staff employed locally, including non-clinical staff, may have valuable knowledge to contribute to the initial risk assessment, so on and so forth, and should be encouraged whenever possible to assist with the initial risk assessment.
Correct.
Now, would that apply when making risk assessments about temporarily withdrawing from community?
Yes.
Okay. And does that include Aboriginal staff?
Yes.
Are there things that Aboriginal staff can bring to the table insofar as your risk assessments are concerned that your non-Indigenous staff might not be able to?
Yeah, absolutely. They know the context of what's occurring in the community.
So if there are break-ins, they might know who's in community.
Yes.
If there's unrest or fighting, they might know who it's between.
Yes.
And so you'd agree, wouldn't you? Sorry, can I also ask you this? They tend not to be the victims of property crime, correct?
You mean?
Sorry. Overwhelmingly, when clinic staff are broken into, the complaints come from your non-Indigenous staff, correct?
Correct, but I'm not sure how our local Aboriginal staff, how often they're getting broken into. I was at a meeting with some TOs in Yuendamu. We were talking about break-in and staffs and trying to think of ways how we could what could be done, and they themselves said, we get broken into as well. We don't know how to fix it for ourselves, so they do get broken into too.
In any event, they provide a different perspective. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
The other thing that you take into account, don't you, when managing risk is infrastructure.
Yes.
And when I talk about infrastructure, I'm talking about security screens on doors and things of that nature.
Yes.
And
Sub C of paragraph 61 of your affidavit, you say the infrastructure available in the community to keep staff safe, including the security of the health centre and the security of staff accommodation.
Yes.
So that's not just a long-term project for the Department of Health, that's something you need to take into account when making the decision about withdrawing.
Yes.
D is the services available within the community to keep staff safe, including police or security services.
Yes.
now,
The first time you ever considered that, it seems, was in December of 2020.
Security, yes.
but would you agree that in order to make an assessment of risk,
That's just common sense. You needed to take into account other ways of managing the risk, including other services.
I'm sorry, which part was a common sense part?
sorry,
In order to assess objectively
Yes.
the level of risk,
Yes.
you need to take into account the services that are available within the community to respond to the risk.
Correct, yes.
Property offending is a type of offending, correct?
Yes.
The police respond to property offending.
Yes.
It would have been common sense back in November of 2019 that that was a relevant consideration, correct?
Yes.
okay.
And then finally, you say whether steps could be taken to improve staff safety within the community, such as relocating staff to more secure accommodation, sending additional resources to the community, or engaging with community members and service providers in relation to the safety concerns.
Yes.
Engaging with community members might involve doing things like calling a town meeting.
Yes.
So contacting elders and saying, do you know whose kids are responsible for these break-ins?
Yes.
It might involve doing things like saying, look, we might need to withdraw unless you do something to control your kids.
Yes.
And so that's not just about notifying the community, that's about assessing the level of risk.
Yes.
Because if the community came to the table and said, we really need to help you with this, your risk assessment might be a good deal lower, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because you've got buy-in from the community.
Yes.
All right.
What we've spoken about is your assessment of the level of risk that is posed to staff safety. When making a risk assessment, do you balance this against the level of risk that withdrawing from the community poses to the community?
Yes.
The health implications, in other words, of
Yes.
withdrawing. How do you take them into account?
So certainly we still have to provide an emergency response. So it's considering how do we provide that emergency response. And when we have withdrawn staff, it's to a nearby community. So we still can still provide an emergency response into that community. I guess in those examples listed where there was fighting, it was an association that would only attend that community back with police.
Is it fair to say that the health needs of a given community will fluctuate over time?
I guess as time goes on, we're talking a long time, there's an increase in chronic diseases within Central Australia, if that's what you mean.
That's what I'm saying is that it's clinic staff on the ground who are going to know who the particularly sick people in the community are.
Yes.
Does that information get relayed to you when making an assessment about risk?
So there is we have what's called a vulnerable people list and what their conditions are, so we know who are the most vulnerable in the community.
And who's that updated by?
Clinic managers, clinics rates that, yes.
And does that document end up on your desk when you make
It does.
a decision?
Does it? So again, in the situations described where there was staff perceived an immediate risk, they're immediately withdrawn because they considered the risk right there and then they needed to go. So there was very little time to make a further decision about much else. But consider when the staff are withdrawn, we then do consider what's happening in the community, yes.
So the answer is no, that doesn't end up on your desk before you make the decision.
In situations where we need to withdraw them straight away, there is no time to make that assessment. If we perceive there's risk of the staff is too great, yes.
And that's because you perceive the risk to be immediate, is that
Correct, yes.
Can I ask you to... No, I won't. The final part of the policy I wanted to ask you about is the requirement that the risk assessment be documented in writing.
Yes.
Was the risk assessment, before I ask you that, the reason for this, is it fair to say there are two reasons for this? One is just to ensure that the process is rigorous.
Yes.
That you consider everything you need to.
Yes.
And in fact, the policy identifies at the very end a risk matrix.
Yes.
And it sets out the types of things that you would consider when making decisions of this kind.
Yes.
A checklist of sorts.
Yes.
But the other purpose is to ensure accountability, isn't it?
Yes.
To ensure that when these really significant decisions that might have really significant health implications are made, the decision making is transparent.
Yes.
Did you document your decision making in writing on the 9th of November?
I did not know.
Are you aware of whether Fiona Cameron did?
I'm not aware, no.
I want to ask you some questions about the index events, so the lead up to the 9th of November and the 9th of November. You say in your statutory declaration that, look, break-ins happen from time to time, but that you weren't aware that there had been any issues or anything out of the ordinary happening in community in the lead up to the 9th of November.
Correct.
Now, you're aware, aren't you, that Cassandra Holland gave evidence yesterday?
Yes.
Yes. And she was an employee of the clinic in November of 2019.
Yes.
Can I just read you some of her evidence at page 1378? In this part of her evidence, Ms. Holland was asked by Ms. Dwyer about the steps, if any, she took to notify the Department of Health about her concerns regarding security in the 5 months that she was in Yuendamu. I might just read you the evidence. She says, what about in the 5 months at Yuendamu? Did you ever make a specific request to the Senate? And she answers no. She's then asked, what about your management team, Luana or above her? Did you ask that anything specifically be done? And she says, it was a constant, we certainly discussed the security of our houses. That was a constant concern. And the fact that we didn't have proper windows in our houses and we had perspex that could be pushed in. The houses were not secure, and that was very frequently discussed. She's asked, how was that discussed? I put in an IMS regarding it, as in an incident management system. And you're aware that there's a system called Riskman.
Yes.
And you log incidents of
Yes.
health and safety nature into that
Yes.
system. But she says, I had spoken directly whilst I was down at conferences, and I've spoken to Luana. And she's asked, and was anything done in relation to those concerns that you raised during your 5 months there? Nothing was done. So a number of things have occurred to us in court while we've listened to your security concerns, and one example of an improvement may be the installation of cameras in houses. Was that ever discussed? No, it was never discussed. And then she's asked some questions about alarms. What level of awareness did you have of these security concerns in Yuendamu in the 5 months leading up to November 2019?
Certainly I had some awareness. I guess when I said I didn't have an awareness, I was talking about awareness in the previous week as opposed to previous months. So I wasn't really talking back than that. And certainly over 2019, there have been some break-ins. I believe there was probably a lot going in that wasn't really being recorded in Riskman, so I wasn't aware of more was going on. There did seem to be people normalised that and considered as being normal, and didn't, even though there's a requirement to enter into Riskman, incidents weren't entered into Riskman. I remember attending in a community meeting, I believe, after one of our admin staff and her husband had been enrolled in his wheelchair. That had been organised by his employer, but house staff and I turned up to that meeting to talk about that. I recall that we had, with the district manager, there's a local authority meeting occurring, and we wanted deputation to talk about some other issues, but we want to talk about safety as well. That was declined as it was being too general, and I don't think that meeting was cancelled anyway. So I was aware of general break-ins in Yuendamu, yes.
But effectively, because of under-reporting on Riskman, some of these concerns weren't.
That's correct, yes. Yeah.
And is it your evidence that certainly requests for additional security screens weren't being communicated to you?
I don't believe that. I think the thing around the Perspex, people had the impression that because of a Perspex they could be kicked out. However, I think when we investigated that, I didn't think that to be true, if I recall, but...
But at least your evidence is that you weren't made aware in the lead up to November of 2019 that staff were requesting quite specifically additional security infrastructure.
I don't recall. No, I don't know.
Beck, can I please have document 917? I believe that's the separate document in the folder. I might have misidentified it. This is the Riskman platform, is that right?
Yes.
Can I ask you to turn to page 9 of the PDF, Beck? Right, can we scroll down, please? Stop there. Now, under the heading when it happened, when did it happen, you can see that the incident date is the 10th of March 2019.
Yes.
And the date it was entered in Riskman was the 12th of March 2019, correct?
Yes.
And this is the type of document that would have crossed your desk, correct?
Yes, I believe. Yes, all Riskmans do come by email. Okay. Yeah, so...
Can we just scroll down slightly? Now you can see the details. Lot 431 Coniston Street staff accommodation broken into. Coniston Street staff accommodation broken into bathroom windows, smashed to gain entry.
Yes.
And that's effectively a description of what had happened.
Yes.
Can we scroll down a little bit further? All right. Under investigations and findings, it says DM, so that's the district manager.
Yes.
Housing notified and requested repair ASAP. Deputy GM notified and requested to escalate for security screens to be added to both sides of window. This house has been broken into many times. Now, Deputy GM to escalate means to escalate to you, correct?
No, it's escalating it to housing, for housing to action.
I see. So underneath that it says 8.5 still awaiting response from GM/housing. Is that not a reference from you?
There's a reference to me, but I don't know what that means because I would have to look at my email or see what's going on. But certainly we escalate. If housing's not addressing, then we escalate the housing to address. So housing is responsible for repairs and security. So we just put the request to them, and if they don't action, then we escalate up housing.
But it does appear as if someone within the Yuendamu Health Clinic had notified you of the desire of clinic members that their houses be fitted with additional security screens.
I would have to see what I was emailed or what the request was to be really able to make any comment.
And indeed, there's a note underneath the 8th of May entry that says, August 2019, ongoing concerns raised, no further broken windows at this event. Further discussions regarding security screens for all housing in remote communities.
Yes.
What would you say if it were put to you that staff in the clinic in Yuendamu made a number of requests of the Department of Housing to assist them to feel safer in Yuendamu, but their requests fell on deaf ears?
Sorry, say that again.
It has been suggested,
yes.
Some of the evidence we heard
yep.
yesterday, that
requests were made of the Department of Housing
Yes.
to install security in
Yes.
infrastructure and that nothing happened?
I agree that we did put requests in, but yes, things were very, very slow in happening, yes.
Can you just let me know,
What does the bureaucracy involve? You get a request from staff, they're feeling really unsafe. What do you do in that moment? Who do you email? Who do you call?
So I guess we go to housing and say, can we, this is a problem, can we have security screens? I recall discussions with housing, so we did talk with the person responsible in housing, and it must have been, it's hard to remember the years now, but certainly there have been discussions about screens in housing. Often problem is that housing saying they don't have the budget for this kind of thing. So this is where we're asking them to do this, and then they're coming back saying we don't have the money.
Is the Department of Housing funded to install infrastructure of this kind?
Yes.
it is?
That's their responsibility. I suppose they get funding for that. I don't know.
Department of Health, is the Department of Health?
No.
With what level of urgency are you making these requests of the Department of Housing?
We had, discussions with housing about these kind of matters and saying this is what we wanted. Housing did we're talking about window security screens, and I think certainly following the incident, these things were taken more seriously. Housing did come out I remember being out with housing to look at the windows, and they investigated what was the most proper type of security screen, and so following that, security screens were installed.
When you say following that incident, which incident?
So the November incident of 2019.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prior to November of 2019, with what degree of frequency would you be having these discussions? Every day?
No. It was now and then, not a daily thing. Yeah.
I mean, the types of risks that you're talking about are immediate risks to staff safety. People are waking up in their homes with people inside their bedrooms. Don't you think that this was the kind of thing that justified urgency in your dealings with the Department of Housing?
Yes.
All right.
Why don't you think there was that level of urgency?
From my perspective, I guess we were trying to push the Department of Housing to do things, but things weren't progressed.
You'd agree, wouldn't you, that if you don't deal with security issues in the long term, it's more likely that situations of crisis or emergency will emerge?
Yes.
Because you haven't installed the infrastructure that you need to manage those security concerns.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I want to turn to the 9th of November. The 9th of November obviously fell on a Saturday. Over the weekend, remote staff have access to what's called management on call.
Yes.
What's the purpose of management on call?
So this is to provide line management and over a weekend. So we had what was called an on-call coordinator who took the initial calls. About 50% of our calls are simply about monitoring staff travel. So if staff are leaving community or coming back in, we can get notified that they've left and what time they arrived, just to check that they've arrived safely. And then we have an on-call manager where any management issues or other issues that need to be escalated, they'll go to the on-call manager. And then above that, we have what we call an on-call executive, and any other issues, which I think I put in my affidavit around death in community or unrest or those nature, then go to our executive on-call.
And there's one rung below the on-call manager, isn't there? The on-call
Yes, coordinator.
Okay. Yeah. And above the on-call executive, there's you.
No, the on-call executive is the same level as me out of hours. That's my level, yes.
On the 9th of November, the on-call coordinator was Janine Bridges.
Yes.
The on-call manager was Helen Gill.
Yes.
I want to just ask you some questions about the on-call manager. What kind of things can they deal with without escalating to the on-call executive? In terms of safety concerns, what could they do?
Safety concerns? I guess again, they can liaise with different people, talk with different people about safety concerns. So they're the first line in talking with staff about their safety concerns and seeing what they can put in place to mitigate against their safety concerns. So they are the first line to try and sort out all the problems. Yep.
But they don't have the delegation to authorise a temporary withdrawal.
No, I wouldn't say that, yes.
And then above that, you have the executive, who on the 9th of November was Fiona Cameron.
Yes.
And at the same level, you have the general manager.
So out of hours, the executive on call was acting in my place since I'm not necessarily available 24/7 to talk to.
Okay.
Yeah.
If these decisions needed to be made during the week,
Yes.
am I right that you would make the decision, not the executive on call manager?
Correct.
Okay. The on call executive.
Yes.
At 9:08 a.m, you received a call from Helen Gill,
Yes.
And she told you that she couldn't contact Fiona Cameron.
Yes.
And that was because Fiona Cameron was living outside Alice Springs and was experiencing difficulties with phone reception, correct?
Correct.
Were you aware of that before the 9th of November?
Fiona Cameron lives just on the other side of Ranges, which is notorious for patchy phone reception. So it's just a general Alice Springs thing that it doesn't work. It just can be patchy. You get through when you try again, but it's just one of those things.
In any event, am I right that had Fiona Cameron answered her telephone,
Yes.
you might not have been contacted at all
Yeah, absolutely.
on the 9th of November?
Yes.
Okay. What did Helen Gill tell you when she called you shortly after 9 o'clock?
So I guess the first conversation was that I believe she mentioned that Vanessa house had been attempted to break in. That I understood that there were multiple people trying to break into that house, and she'd been up all night, and that Cassandra wanted to do the be on the cover on call for Vanessa. I also understood that Luana's house had been broken into and maybe a car had been smashed.
Now, at that point you say in your statutory declaration, and I think also in your affidavit, that you were concerned and disappointed for them,
Yes.
or on behalf of them,
Yes.
but you didn't consider that any further action was required at that stage.
I considered that I didn't need to at that stage. She was going to do Fiona. I didn't believe she had all. I don't believe Helen said she didn't have all the information. She was still going to talk with the staff about what's going on. So it was initial, this is what happened, but there was understood there's going to be further conversations.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you told Helen to keep trying Fiona and to call back if you couldn't.
Yes.
Reach her.
Yes.
Had the situation not changed, so you had a situation where perhaps a couple of your staff had been broken into, there was some concern, but not a high degree of concern within the clinic. Based on that information, would you have considered it necessary to withdraw from Unimit?
Based on what I got told from Helen at that time, I didn't believe it was a very serious situation. I didn't believe I had enough information really to make any judgment other than it sounded quite serious.
So you just couldn't have made a decision on the basis
No.
of that information?
No.
You received another call shortly before midday
Yes.
from Fiona Cameron.
Yeah.
Can I ask you why she was calling you if she had the authority to make?
Yes, I guess part of that conversation was asking about could staff withdraw. Obviously, it's a very big decision, and I guess if you can get hold of the general manager, you would ask him to make the decision rather yourself.
Now, as a result of that conversation, it appears that the decision was made to withdraw staff.
Yes.
And that decision was made in that conversation shortly before midday.
Yes.
Whose decision was it?
Mine.
Okay. What did you discuss with Fiona Cameron?
So we discussed, so I got further information about what had gone on with Vanessa. I understood that there had been tools used to try and enter into the house. I understood that Vanessa was awake. I understood that the people who were trying to enter into the house knew Vanessa was awake and that she was trying to get in. Found out that there was another 2 staff houses that had also been tried to enter onto that night. And again, maybe some extra vehicles had been damaged, so there was extra information of what had gone on. Understood that staff were feeling very unsafe and then were wanting to leave community.
What did you think would happen when the staff withdrew? How long did you think they'd be gone?
On that 12 o'clock phone call.
During the 12 o'clock, did you consider what was to happen?
So I guess I did tell Fiona, okay, but can we send a couple of staff to Uluru, so we'll provide emergency services to Uluru, as we still had to provide emergency services, so we weren't leaving the community without any service. So it was that requirement. I had thought that hopefully whoever was breaking into the houses, that somehow the police would be able to sort out the problem, arrest the person, and was considering that possibly they'd be able to go back the next day, and because they were based in Uluru, we'd be able to go back as soon as it was considered to be safe.
So in your view, because they would be based in Uluru, do you mean that the staff would withdraw to Uluru, or some staff would withdraw?
Two staff. I required two clinical staff to go to Uluru so they could provide emergency services back to Uluru. Yeah.
The balance of the staff would go back to Alice Springs.
Yes. So again, there's only 2 people on call working in the weekend, so I only need 2 people working to cover the services for emergency services in Uluru. Yeah.
And at that point, you anticipated that you might be able to return the very next day.
Yeah, as soon as we heard, I believe whoever was breaking in, hopefully that person was stopped or arrested, then the next staff would go back.
I'll ask you some more questions about that in a moment, but the staff who you wanted to go to Uluru didn't end up going to Uluru.
No.
Do you have any theories about what went wrong there?
I guess on an inquiry, I guess when I talked with Helen, he said staff wanted to be together, but it makes no sense to me why staff did not go to Uluru.
So Helen told you that...
This was later down the track I'm talking.
This is a conversation you had with Helen down the track.
I'm talking about maybe weeks down the track or months down the track. It wasn't there and then. I didn't realise they didn't go to Uluru until the 7:30 phone call. Yeah.
But certainly you had a conversation with Helen Gill sometime down the track where she said the staff didn't want to go to Uluru.
I understood when I inquired with Helen, do you know why they didn't go to Uluru? She said she wasn't sure the reason other than she thought the staff wanted to be together.
Were you ever made aware that John Alting put his hand up to go to Uluru?
No, I did not know that. No.
All right. Now, coming back to the steps that you step through when you're making the risk assessment, the first is that it's necessary to consider the views of staff. Do you agree?
Yes.
Now, those views were expressed to you by Fiona Cameron.
Yes.
Who heard them from Helen Gill.
Yes.
Who had talked to, at that point in time, some but not all members of staff.
I'm not sure who Helen talked to, but I imagined Helen had talked with all staff, yes.
Were you aware that shortly after Helen Gill got off the phone with Fiona Cameron and Fiona Cameron called you, Helen then had a telephone call with all of the clinic staff?
No, I was.
Were you aware that during that conversation the health clinic discussed their concerns with Gill?
No, I'm not aware of that. Those conversations.
Certainly the information that the health staff were providing was critical to assessing the degree of risk, is that correct?
Yes.
It was critical to understanding the desires of your staff?
Yes.
It was critical to assessing the health implications to the Yuendamu community because they were treating them.
Yes.
And it was critical to giving clear directions to local staff about who they should consult with in the community should they withdraw.
Yes.
How they were to notify community to ensure that the withdrawal was safe. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, from a management perspective, it was Helen Gill who represented the Department of Health in this meeting with the clinic staff, correct?
As management, yes.
Okay. But she didn't hold a delegation to authorise the withdrawal.
No.
Okay. You and Fiona held that delegation.
Yes.
But you didn't participate in the discussion.
No.
Okay. Because you didn't participate in that conversation, you didn't have the information that you needed to assess the degree of risk or the staff's wishes, did you?
Well, I got told that all staff wanted to leave because they felt unsafe, and I had the objective of I've been told that people unknown were trying to break into a house with tools while our staff member was there. So, as well as that, there have been multiple attempted break-ins into other staff houses. So I had that objective information, which I believe to be enough to consider risk on the staff safety side.
Okay. What if the staff had told you, look, we feel safe, we want to stay? Would you still have withdrawn the loan amount?
It would have been in a balance of what could we put in place, what could maybe have done that would have mitigated the risks of someone trying to enter their house and while they were there. So it still would have required extra risk mitigation strategies.
And the people best placed to provide you information about those risk mitigation strategies would be the staff themselves who were living in these houses, wouldn't it?
They could provide some information, but I don't believe they'd necessarily provide that answer. They might be able to. I'm not saying they can't, but I'm not. Maybe they would. Yeah.
Who else could provide that information?
So I guess if you're thinking about what mitigation strategies could we do, so I guess what we've done since then was about talking about contact the police directly by phone. I don't believe any of the staff necessarily would have thought of that idea. Again, the security guards, no one to my knowledge has suggested that until we thought about January 2020. I guess since we do have these multiple problems going on and we have community meetings and staff meetings to talk about, there's very few ideas about how we can mitigate against these things.
Certainly they could have provided you with information about whether their doors were still locked.
Yes.
Whether the windows were locked.
Yes. But someone's trying to get into a house with tools, irrespective of the locked doors or the windows. So that was a factor of locked doors and secure windows. There's a factor of someone trying to enter a house with tools.
Given what you had said about the staff's desires,
Probably hold it then. So many chances of settlements.
It's a Facebook call too, isn't it?
Is that what that's saying?
in any event, I think you've accepted that had the views of the staff on the ground been different, that might have influenced.
That would have influenced, yes. Yeah.
Why didn't you pick up the phone and have a conversation with the staff on the ground?
I guess I considered that Helen and Fiona were working on that weekend. They were both experienced managers who I have complete confidence that they could manage the situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in a sense, they weren't managing the situation. You've said it was your decision, correct?
It was my decision, correct?
And it fell to you to manage risk, didn't it?
Yes.
And don't you agree that even if they were provided with the information they needed, there was a real risk that things would be lost in translation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was the situation so urgent that you couldn't have asked to have a conference with the clinic staff?
I could have asked the conference with the clinic staff, yes.
Okay, but you didn't?
No.
Okay. I want to ask you some questions now about the objective assessment that you make and the involvement of local stakeholders, specifically the police. Obviously, I think you recognise that it's important to ensure that police are informed about health decision making.
Yes.
But you'd also agree that the police can assist you by providing information, correct?
Yes.
And that they may be one of the most important sources of information, objective information, critical to a risk assessment.
Yes.
Okay. What conversations did you have with the police in Yuendamu before you made the decision shortly before midday?
Yes, I didn't have any conversations with the police.
Okay. And were you aware of whether there had been any conversations between health and the police about risk prior to your conversation with Fiona at midday?
I'm not aware of any conversations, no.
So on that date, you didn't know what the police thought of the break-ins, did you?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
No.
You didn't know whether you thought that they were increasing?
Well, from my perspective,
Your perspective,
No,
you didn't know
no.
whether the police thought
Oh, no, I didn't know what the police thought. No.
you didn't know whether the police thought that they were targeted at.
I didn't know. No, I didn't know what the police thought. No.
No. Wasn't this information essential to ensure that your risk assessment was objective?
I believe it is objective the fact that someone was trying to enter houses with tools while staff were there, that there was 4 houses that had been attempted to break into, and that was the objective. I believe that was objective information, despite whether police thought there was extra break-ins or what was going on. There was objective assessment that someone was trying into a staff house while they were there.
You gave evidence a little bit earlier that one reason it might have been safe to go back the next day was that the police might identify and arrest the offender, correct?
Correct.
For all you knew, that offender could have been arrested before you made the decision at midday.
I did, at that conversation with Fiona, I said, could we please talk with the community elders and police? So even if I wasn't aware of what conversations had occurred with police to date, I had requested conversations do occur with police, so I would have expected that if that information had occurred, there was that conversations between, say, Helen and police.
But this was after you made the decision to withdraw.
Yes, but I did ask for that request to talk with police about the withdrawal.
Okay.
Yes.
But in circumstances where health had made the decision.
Yes.
Okay. So it's not as if you were seeking information from police to inform your risk assessment. You were just informing them about what you'd done.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you give evidence at paragraph 113 of your affidavit that you inquired whether the decision to withdraw staff had been discussed with the elders and with local police. I understood from Fiona that it had been discussed or that it would be discussed before staff withdrew.
Yes.
So it's fair to say that you didn't know whether the conversations had occurred or whether they were to occur in the future?
I think when I asked the question and she said yes, looking back, I'm not sure whether she was meaning yes, we'll go and do it, or yes, we have done it. Yeah.
Given that you were making the decision, don't you think it was important that you spoke with local police?
I believe that with my managers on call talking with police, that I was quite happy if they were talking to police to feedback what was going on. Yep.
Now, assuming that the police hadn't arrested anyone, you also didn't know what the police could have done
To manage the risk of further break-ins, did you?
No.
And this is effectively the 5th category of consideration when assessing risk. What other services are there in the community that could manage risk?
Yes.
Okay. You didn't know how many police were in the community who could have provided extra security?
No, but police don't provide security in a sense like a security guard.
You didn't know what level of police presence there was in the community?
Not exactly, but you know they usually had around about 4 officers, so a rough idea of how many police are in Yuendamu.
Okay. Now, by about 3:52 p.m, you appear to have sent a text message It's at paragraph 13 of your affidavit. I apologise. It's paragraph 13 of your statutory declaration. You sent it to Sue Corner, the Chief Operations Officer, and you said, "Hi, hope you're feeling better. We've removed the staff from Yuendamu as youth are running riot, attempting to break into staff homes when they are there and have damaged several cars. Extra police are on the way. We'll cover from Yuendamu with police assistance." I take it that by that point in the day, you were aware that extra police were on their way to Yuendamu?
Yes.
And in fact, when asked whether you thought that that increased the level of risk in the community, in your affidavit you said, no, it decreased it, it was a protective factor.
Yes.
Okay. Certainly, you didn't know when you made the decision at midday on the 9th of November that police were contemplating sending out.
No.
No. Were you ever made aware that the purpose of sending them out, or one of the purposes, was to provide high visibility patrols in the community?
No.
In other words, to create visibility of police and deter offenders from committing offences, property offences?
No.
Okay. And that is precisely the type of in-community service that would have been relevant to your risk assessment, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Given that you did become aware of it at 3:52 p.m, at that point, did you reconsider the decision to withdraw staff?
Again, I believe that staff had left, but staff had gone to Yuendamu.
You thought staff had gone to Yuendamu at that point?
Yes, I believe people had already left community by that point and staff had gone to Yuendamu, yes.
Okay. Was any consideration given to bringing the staff from Yuendamu, who you thought were in Yuendamu,
Yes.
back to Yuendamu?
Not at that stage, no.
Do you think it should have been, given that the risk factors had changed?
Although the risk factors has changed, I don't think the risk factors have changed enough that I would consider that had enough that staff should still be there by themselves. No.
Okay.
No.
Where did you find out that? Where did you find out that extra police were on their way to Yuendamu?
I believe it was a phone call about 3:30.
Okay, from whom?
Well, I think I may have said Helen. Things are a bit fuzzy around those conversations, but although maybe I put my affidavit to Helen, I'm thinking maybe it was possibly Fiona. So it was Fiona or Helen, probably Fiona maybe at 3:30.
Okay, so did it occur to you that maybe you needed to get on the phone to Julie Frost, the police sergeant in Yuendamu, and say, look, what do you have contemplated? What's the nature of these high visibility patrols?
I didn't understand to be high visibility patrols. I just understood a team was going out to arrest somebody.
Okay, so Helen Gill told you that a team was going out to arrest Kumanjayi Walker.
No names were mentioned. I understood there was a 19-year-old that possibly was a ringleader with some other children, or teenagers, and that there was a group of police going out to arrest. There was no names mentioned or anything.
Didn't you think it was important to have a conversation with the police in Yuendamu about the specifics of that plan?
No, I did not.
Would it have been relevant to your risk assessment if you had known that the police planned to have 4 members of the IRT patrolling the streets of Yuendamu on the night of the 9th of November?
That information might have been helpful, but I did understand Helen had been speaking with the police, so whether the information, what had been information from Helen to Fiona to me, it was around that there was extra police going out to arrest somebody. Yeah.
I want to ask you now about other members of the community as a source of information about risk. What conversations did you have with elders in the community?
I had no conversations.
What about your subordinates?
So I did talk with Fiona and say, could we make sure we talk with the traditional owners and community. And so I believe I guess I come to know that Cassandra was one of the people who went around community. And I guess in my meeting that I had on that following Monday, Mr. Nelson said that he had been talked to about the withdrawal.
Okay. They're things that you learned after.
Yes.
In terms of what you knew at midday when you made the decision on the 9th of November, you didn't know whether there had been any conversations.
No, it's correct. Yeah.
Didn't you need to make sure that those conversations occurred?
Again, I believe Helen and Fiona were making those arrangements for those conversations to occur.
Didn't you think that it might have informed your risk assessment to know what elders thought was happening in the community at that time?
It may have formed my risk assessment, yes.
Why didn't you get on the phone?
Again, Helen and Fiona were the people on call that weekend, so they were arranging what was going on over that weekend.
You were making the decision at midday. Didn't it occur to you to say to Helen or Fiona, look, I need some information from the community in order to make an assessment of risk?
They would have gone into the assessment of risk. From my perspective, from what I believe, is that again, people were breaking into houses. We didn't know who these people were. So again, since then, this is occurring quite often, is that when people are breaking in, but we don't know who these people are, and so no one's got solutions to be able to address, because no one can actually say these are the people who are doing it. So we had what I knew, we had no information to tell anybody. We've got break-ins, but we can't give you any names. We can't give you any information.
What about holding a community meeting to see if it could have been resolved in that way, publicly without identifying individual offenders?
Yes, our community could have meeting been had. I guess there was a funeral on at that time, so I'm not quite sure the appropriateness of holding a community meeting while there was a funeral going on.
And we've been talking about the community and elders more broadly, but what about your Indigenous clinic staff? As far as you knew at midday on the 9th of November, had any of them been spoken to?
I didn't know whether that
You
was...
didn't know what their views were on the staff?
No, I did not know.
Did you know whether they wanted to withdraw?
I do understand that, certainly with Jefferson, I understood later that he had been talked with and asked if he wanted to withdraw, and he said he wanted to stay.
Okay, but that was after you made the decision at midday?
Yes.
Did it not occur to you that it might be important to ask Fiona on the phone, look, you've told me what the non-Indigenous staff want to do, what do the Indigenous staff think?
I could have asked Fiona that, yes.
Now I want to ask you about what other steps could have been taken to improve staff safety. Did you consider any other steps short of withdrawing the entire clinic when you were making your decision midday on the night?
I couldn't think of other steps at that time that could have been done to mitigate the risk that would have reduced the risk enough.
Did you ask Fiona Cameron about other steps?
I did not know.
Didn't it occur to you that that was an important question to ask, given it's one of the 5 considerations you identify in your affidavit?
I could have asked her the question, yes.
Why didn't you ask the question?
I guess she agreed that staff with been withdrawn, so she had considered the risks herself, and her opinion was that staff should have been withdrawn as well at that time, because she had considered what were the risks and what were the options. So we were in agreement that this was appropriate action.
What about sending people in, people like management, to support staff and make them feel safer?
Yes, I do realise it says that in our guideline. I don't believe. I guess if we're talking about setting management in, was it management to come in and talk to community, to help talk with community? I guess that was I guess where that's coming from, but that wasn't considered at the time.
What about pulling staff out to somewhere like Tilmouth Well for the night? If they were coming out for a single night, why not pull them out somewhere like Tilmouth so that they could service the community if they were needed?
Yeah, that's why we wanted staff to go to Yulamuru. It's far closer than Tilmouth Well.
Were you told anything about whether your staff had identified alternatives?
No.
Are you aware that Cassandra Holland gave evidence about this yesterday?
Yes, yes.
You're aware, for example, that her perception of the meeting with Helen Gill was that the clinic staff came to management with their concerns about their safety,
Yes.
not necessarily asking to be withdrawn, but just asking to be supported. That was her evidence, at least. I'm not asking.
Okay. That right? Yes, yes,
You're aware that that's the evidence that she gave?
yes.
And that she said that nobody in the meeting, that is, the clinic staff, said, look, we definitely want to go. We're just asking for support.
That's what she was saying. She said.
Yeah.
Okay.
She also said that she was disappointed that management didn't raise an alternative scenario. Is it your evidence that there were simply no alternatives in the circumstances?
I believe that there was no alternative that we could think of at that time. Correct.
What about the risk assessment or the assessment of the health implications for the community? In what way did you consider that at midday on the 9th of November?
Yes, that was considered, and that was the mitigation factor was providing those services from Uluru. So that was the providing emergency response from Uluru. Yes.
Did you go through that sheet that you talked about, or the log of the particularly vulnerable patients in the community at midday?
I understood Helen. I'm not a clinician, so Helen did that.
Okay.
But certainly you didn't ask her, look, Helen, I'm about to make this really significant decision. Is there anything I need to know about the clinical needs in Yuendumu at the moment?
So I know that Helen was also considering the risk from her level, and she was, again, this was the risk mitigation by removing staff to Uluru, and so she would have considered vulnerable people as well.
Before the decision was made at approximately midday, just to summarise, you hadn't spoken to the non-Indigenous clinic staff who were to be removed.
Correct.
You hadn't spoken to the Indigenous clinic staff who were to remain.
Correct.
You didn't know whether they wanted to remain or leave.
Well, I understood, no, from Fiona, they all wanted to leave, was what I've been told.
Sorry, the Indigenous clinic staff.
Oh, so Indigenous clinic staff? Not specifically.
Okay. You hadn't spoken to stakeholders like the police.
No.
You hadn't spoken to elders or community members.
No.
And despite what's said in the temporary withdrawal guideline, you didn't conduct a documented risk assessment.
Correct.
What was so urgent?
So I guess the document. So I guess if we're thinking about the document risk assessment, I guess that consider that being again the on-call manager putting that together. I guess that wasn't done because many things that Helen was dealing with at the time. At the same time, there was a bus rollover that had to be dealt with as well. So I guess the things that go into the document risk assessment is our business that we know explicitly. We know what the risks are, we know what the mitigation factors are, and even though we haven't put them down to a template, we do know what these things are. So they weren't documented in a template, but we do know this is our business, yes.
Let's just focus on the people you didn't speak to before making the decision. Why were things so urgent that you couldn't have picked up the phone and spent half an hour to an hour calling around, talking to Julie Frost, talking to your staff?
Again, Helen was the on-call manager, so I consider she was, and I had confidence that she was doing talking with those groups of people.
But you didn't ask her the questions. You didn't ask her for the information that you've said that you'd need to make an objective decision.
I believe I had enough information based on what had occurred to make that objective thing. Now, certainly more information might have reduced the risk, but I don't believe that any extra information reduced the risk enough not to withdraw the staff.
So you're saying that the things that you didn't know about couldn't have changed your mind?
I'm saying that in retrospect, thinking of what things could have been said or what we did know about made no difference to reducing that risk.
At page 18 of your affidavit, at paragraph 108 sub D, you say, I was concerned that the antisocial behaviour directed towards our staff appeared to be escalating. I did not believe they were in any immediate danger that day. However, I was concerned what might occur later that evening. It's fair to say that you had a couple of hours to play with before you needed to make a decision about staff safety on the night of November.
There was a couple of hours, yes.
Why didn't you take a couple of hours to consult more widely?
Again, I was knowing, well, as part of the on-call manager's duties and responsibilities, they would be undertaking those conversations.
Mr. Reith, finally, I wanted to ask you some questions. Obviously, your perceptions of what the clinic staff were a really important part of your decision-making.
Yes.
You're aware, as I've said, that Cass Holland gave evidence that she didn't necessarily want to leave.
Yes.
Were you aware that she'd in fact asked to stay?
I think maybe later in the afternoon, either with Helen or Fiona, that had been raised that she had said that she had wanted to stay.
Are you aware that Matilda Starbuck, for example, at page 29 of her recorded statement says that she was frightened but didn't necessarily want to leave, and that it was management's direction that the clinic staff leave?
Sorry, are you asking, am I aware that...
Are you aware that that's her evidence?
I did listen to her evidence, but I can't recall what she said around that, no.
Yeah, I know the time.
Did you know that the Indigenous staff members hadn't participated in the meetings with Helen?
No, I didn't know that.
And what do you think about that?
I think they should have been included.
How do you think they were missed?
I think the issue was that where the break-ins were occurring, it was in staff housing where non-Aboriginal people live. So I think that maybe discussions were about the staff break-ins and so who was living in that area, and that it wasn't affecting the non-Aboriginal people. So maybe that was a consideration why they weren't included, because I don't think they were infected. But I certainly believe they should have been included.
The decision to leave certainly affected them.
I do believe that they weren't part of that first meeting, true, but I do believe they were then contacted afterwards. But I totally agree they should have been included in that meeting, yeah.
It's more, I guess, how could it be that they were not included?
Yeah, I don't know why they weren't included. I was only suggesting that because it wasn't their houses that, to my knowledge, were being broken into.
And what is being done to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again, that such critical people are excluded from the decision-making process?
So again, with our NTY remote safety project committee with Central Australia, we now call on the Regional Director of Chief Minister and Cabinet. So we have those discussions to make people properly consulted. And in Indamoo, there is a local representative of Chief Minister and Cabinet who has been there since January 2021. So he's been our primary. We've had other issues who I talk to, so we can talk, I guess, with the traditional owners, but certainly including that we talk with our staff as well.
You need to go to that person to ensure you speak to your own.
No, sorry, I was meaning not us. I wasn't talking about our staff. Sorry, I was kind of broadening the answer. Yeah.
And you said that you didn't think there was any additional information that might have changed your view as to the risk and the steps that were taken.
I struggle to think what additional information would have may have come in that would have mitigating the risk.
In Superintendent Knowles' statement, he said that he spoke to Helen Gill at about 2:30 p.m. that day.
Mm-hmm.
And he was informed about the decision for health staff to leave. And he told Helen about the police enhancement of local resources, namely 4 IRT members and a dog unit. to provide support to local police, and asked whether, that would be taken into account to address risk. Do you think that 4 additional IRT members plus a dog unit might have reduced the risk to your staff?
Yes,
Right, is that something, if you'd known about, you might have taken that
Yes.
into account?
yes.
Right, thanks. Any other questions? Sorry, yes?
Certainly, yes, Your Honour.
Mr Mullins.
I wasn't quite sure whether we were having a break.
I thought that might
Oh, sorry, we can have a break.
I thought he was suggesting a break.
No,